The ballroom fell silent, the music scratching to a halt. All eyes were on her. Lady Beatrice's cruel laugh echoed as she ripped the high-necked lace of the gown, revealing the truth Eleonora had hidden for a decade. The raised, silvered skin of her scars, marks of fire and sacrifice, was bared for all of London to see. Eleonora froze, her soul screaming, wanting to evaporate. She turned to flee, to run back to the shadows that had been her only home. But her path was blocked by the most powerful man in the room, the Duke of Ashworth. As she turned her scarred face away in shame, he caught her hand, leaned in, and whispered the words that would change everything. "They're proof you survived." The flickering gaslights of Lord Harrington's Mayfair ballroom did little to warm the corners where Eleonora Vance preferred to live. From her alcove behind a wilting potted palm, she possessed a perfect view of the spectacle. The silks rustled, the jewels glittered, and the laughter, light and brittle, felt like a language she had long forgotten. Eleonora was a creature of shadows, a necessity enforced by the high-collared, dove-grey gowns she wore, and the long gloves that never, ever left her hands in public. At 24, she served as the companion to Lady Caroline Finch, a girl of 19, whose personality consisted mainly of rattling nerves and a profound obsession with the shade of her own hair. "Nora, fetch me a lemonade. My throat is simply parched," Caroline demanded, tapping Eleonora's arm with her fan. Caroline never used Eleonora's full name. It was always clipped, efficient. "And do try not to look so funereal. You are frightening off potential suitors. For me, I mean." Eleonora nodded, murmured, "Of course, Lady Caroline," and slipped away, her movements practiced and silent. She was grateful for the errand. It gave her purpose, a reason to move through the glittering throng without having to engage with it. Her life had not always been this way. 10 years ago, she had been the daughter of a respected country gentleman, destined for a comfortable, if not dazzling, match. Then came the fire. The smell of smoke still woke her in the night. She remembered the heat, the splintering wood, the terrifying orange glow. She remembered climbing back into the inferno, her nightgown catching like tinder, to pull her 7-year-old brother, Thomas, from his bed. She had thrown him from a first-floor window into the arms of the stable hands below before the floor gave way. Thomas survived without a scratch. Their parents did not. And Eleonora, pulled from the smouldering wreckage hours later, survived as this. The left side of her face, from the cheekbone to her jaw, was a tapestry of silvered, puckered tissue. Her neck and shoulder were worse, and her left arm and hand were a map of her ordeal. The small inheritance left to her was squandered by a distant, feckless cousin, leaving her and Thomas penniless. Thomas, thankfully, had been taken in by a childless uncle. But Eleonora, with her unfortunate appearance, was deemed unsuitable. She was forced into the only trade available to a gently bred woman with no dowry, the thankless, invisible life of a paid companion. She secured the lemonade and was weaving her way back when the crowd suddenly parted. A man of considerable presence stood in the entryway. His dark hair held no fashionable powder, and his black evening attire was immaculate but severe. He did not smile or greet the fawning mothers and daughters. His gaze, sharp and intelligent, swept the room with an air of profound boredom, or perhaps profound sadness. A heavy, silver-topped cane rested in his right hand, and he favoured his left leg almost imperceptibly. "It is the Duke!" Caroline hissed, grabbing Eleonora's arm and nearly upsetting the lemonade. "The Duke of Ashworth, Arthur Blackwood." Eleonora had heard the whispers. A recluse, a war hero from Waterloo, impossibly wealthy and notoriously unmarried. The great prize of the season. They say he took shrapnel at the battle, Caroline whispered excitedly. How terribly romantic. He is looking this way, Nora. How does my hair look? Eleonora murmured something appropriate, but her eyes were fixed on the Duke. His gaze continued its sweep of the room, passing over the diamonds of Lady Beatrice Crawford, skimming past the blushing debutantes. And then it stopped. On her. Hidden in the shadows, holding a glass of lemonade, it stopped on Eleonora Vance. A cold panic seized her. She felt exposed, as if the gaslight had suddenly become a surgeon's lamp. She ducked her head, letting her hair fall forward to cover the left side of her face, and thrust the glass at Caroline. Your lemonade, my lady. Oh, bother the lemonade, Caroline snapped, pushing it back. He is coming over here. Eleonora's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to step back, to melt into the damask wallpaper, but Caroline's grip on her arm was like a vice. The Duke of Ashworth moved with a controlled, graceful limp. He stopped a respectable 3 feet away, his eyes never leaving Eleonora. They were a deep, clear grey, and they held no pity, only interest. Lady Caroline, he said, his voice a low baritone that cut cleanly through the din. He bowed. Your Grace, Caroline twittered, dropping into a near-comical curtsy. What a pleasure. May I introduce my companion, Miss Eleonora Vance. Eleonora curtsied, her eyes fixed on the floor. Your Grace. Miss Vance. The silence stretched. Eleonora could feel the heat of his gaze. He was not looking at her hair or her dress. He was looking at her face. She was certain he could see the ridges of the scars, even in the dim light. She wanted to bolt. You are not enjoying the ball, Miss Vance? He asked. The question was so direct, so unexpected, it startled her. She looked up, forgetting for a second to hide. I am not required to enjoy it, Your Grace. I am here to assist Lady Caroline. A flicker of something, amusement, recognition, crossed his features. He ignored Caroline completely, who was puffing up with indignation. A functional answer, the Duke observed, but not the truth. You find this loud. I find, Your Grace, Eleonora said, her voice quiet but firm, that the finest spectacles are often best appreciated from a distance. Arthur Blackwood studied her for another long moment. He seemed about to say something more when Lady Beatrice Crawford, a vision in emerald green, swept in between them. Arthur, darling, Beatrice trilled, linking her arm through his. You cannot possibly mean to hide in the corners with the staff. You must dance with me. Beatrice shot Eleonora a look of pure, venomous dismissal, a look that said, I know what you are, and you are nothing. The Duke's expression tightened. He extricated his arm from Beatrice's grasp, with cool politeness. Lady Beatrice, forgive me. I do not dance. He tapped his cane lightly on the floor. My leg, you understand. Oh, nonsense. A little pain never hurt a soldier, Beatrice said, missing the dark flash in his eyes. It is not the pain I object to, madam, he said, his voice dropping a degree colder. It is the imbalance. He turned back to Eleonora, who had used the interruption to retreat fully into the shadow of the palm. Miss Vance, he said, inclining his head. I hope you find a more appreciable spectacle. He turned and walked away, leaving Lady Beatrice fuming and Lady Caroline gaping. Eleonora simply closed her eyes, her gloved hands clenched so tightly her fingernails bit into her own scarred palms. He had seen her. And for the first time in 10 years, Eleonora Vance was not sure if she was terrified or, stranger still, intrigued. The Finches retired to their country estate in Kent for the summer, dragging Eleonora with them. She had hoped the Duke of Ashworth would remain a London curiosity, a fleeting, intense encounter she could analyse and eventually dismiss. But Ashworth, the Duke's own sprawling ancestral home, bordered the Finch's property. Eleonora found her only solace in the estate's neglected rose garden. It was her sanctuary. Here, with only the bees and the thorns for company, she could sometimes, remove her stifling gloves. The servants knew her story and left her be, and Lady Caroline never ventured into any area that might stain her slippers. She was kneeling by a struggling bush of white roses, her bare, scarred left hand working fertilizer into the soil when she heard the sound of a horse. Panic, cold and immediate, flooded her. She fumbled for the gloves in her apron pocket, her movements clumsy with haste. "They are eglantines," a deep voice said. "They require a ruthless pruning if they are to bloom again." Eleonora froze, her back to the speaker. She did not need to turn to know. The Duke of Ashworth sat atop a large black stallion, not 20 feet away, regarding her from the other side of a low stone wall. She scrambled to her feet, ramming her hand into the glove, her face burning with humiliation. She kept her body turned away, her head bowed. "Your Grace, you startled me. I am not presentable." "You were gardening, Miss Vance," Arthur said, dismounting with that same controlled grace. He tied the reins to a low-hanging branch and approached the wall. His cane was absent, but she could see the distinct stiffness in his gait. "It is a dirty business, one I happen to enjoy myself." He leaned against the old stone, his gaze on the roses, not on her. It was a calculated politeness, and she was grateful for it. "Lady Caroline is in the main house, Your Grace," she said, her voice tight. "She is practicing her pianoforte." "I heard," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "That is why I am out here." Despite her terror, a small huff of laughter escaped her. She quickly smothered it. "You have a green thumb, Miss Vance," he noted, gesturing to the beds she had been tending. "These have not looked so healthy in years." I find they respond to care, Your Grace," she managed, still refusing to look at him directly. "As do most living things." He paused. "I came to deliver this. I was in London and recalled our conversation at the ball, the one about appreciating spectacles from a distance." He reached into his riding coat and produced a small, leather-bound book. He placed it on the stone wall between them. "It is a first edition of Robert Browning. I find his observations precise. I thought you might enjoy it." Eleonora stared at the book. It was an astonishingly intimate gift, a gift that implied he had listened, that he had thought of her. "I cannot accept this," she whispered, shaking her head. "It is improper. Your Grace, I am a companion, an employee. And I am a man who admires a keen mind," he retorted, his voice losing its softness and gaining a sharper edge. "Do not insult us both, Miss Vance, by pretending this is anything other than what it is. A conversation," continued. "You are the only person I have met this season who has spoken a single sentence of consequence. Take the book." Slowly, her heart hammering, she reached out her gloved right hand and took it. The leather was warm from his coat. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Ashworth." I beg your pardon." "My name," he said. "Or Arthur, if you prefer. Your Grace is what the servants call me. And you are not a servant." She risked a glance at him. He was watching her intently, his grey eyes piercing. He had seen her hand. She knew it. He had seen the gnarled skin, the way the fire had fused the knuckles. And he was still here, still talking to her. "I must return to the house," she said, clutching the book to her chest. "Of course." He did not move to leave. "Miss Vance?" She stopped. "The eglantines," he said, pointing with his chin. "You must cut them back to the strongest 2 stems. Be brutal. It is the only way they will survive the winter." She nodded, unable to speak, and fled back to the house. For the next 2 weeks, their encounters fell into a strange, unspoken routine. He would ride over in the late afternoon, finding her in the garden or the library, where she was meant to be dusting, not reading. Lady Caroline, consumed by a new flirtation with a visiting baronet, was blessedly preoccupied. They spoke of books, they spoke of the war. He spoke of it not with bravado, but with a chilling, hollow weariness that she recognized as a kindred pain. She spoke of her brother, Thomas, now a young man of 17 studying at Cambridge, whom she supported with her meagre wages. Arthur never once mentioned her appearance. He never stared at her covered side. He never offered pity. He simply listened. He treated her as an equal. He sought her opinion, and that, more than any compliment, was terrifying. It was unwinding the careful, protective bandages she had wrapped around her soul for 10 years. It was giving her something to lose. One afternoon, he found her in the library, standing on a stool to reach a copy of Don Quixote. "Allow me," he said, his voice close behind her. She gasped and teetered on the stool. "Your Grace, I did not hear you." He reached up, his hand steadying her at the waist. His touch was firm, impersonal, yet it sent a jolt through her entire body. At the same time, her sleeve, which had been loosely buttoned, snagged on a carved wooden cherub on the bookshelf. With a soft rip, the fabric tore. The sleeve of her dress fell open, exposing the thick, ropey scars that covered her forearm from elbow to wrist. Eleonora let out a small, strangled cry. She yanked her arm free, tearing the fabric further, and stumbled off the stool, landing hard on the floor. The book tumbled after her. "Miss Vance! Eleonora!" She scrambled backward on the floor, crab-walking away from him, pulling her arm to her chest and hiding it in the folds of her skirt. "Do not look," she cried, her voice raw with panic and shame. "Please do not look at me. Go away." She was breathing in short, desperate gasps, the old familiar shame washing over her, hot and acidic. He had seen it, the full, monstrous truth. The game was over. He would leave now, disgusted. Arthur did not leave. He stood perfectly still, his face a mask of concern. He made no move to help her up, sensing correctly that a touch would shatter her. "Elenidra," he said, his voice incredibly soft, using her full name for the first time. "I am not looking." "You saw it," she wept, hiding her face against her knees. "It is hideous. I know it is hideous. Please just go." "I saw an arm," he said, his voice unwavering. "What I see before me now is a woman in terrible pain, and I will not leave you on the floor." He limped forward and crouched, a difficult maneuver for him. He winced as his knee bent, but he ignored it. He set his cane on the carpet and held out his hand, his right hand, the strong one. "Eleonora," he said, his voice a command, but a gentle one. "Take my hand." She shook her head, tears streaming down her hidden face. "I will not ask again." Slowly, trembling from head to foot, she unwrapped her left arm from her body. The sleeve was in tatters. The scarred, damaged skin was pale against the dark wood of the floor. With a broken sob, she placed her bare, scarred hand into his. His fingers closed around hers. They were warm and strong. He did not flinch. He did not recoil. He simply held her hand, as one might hold a frightened bird, and gently, firmly, helped her to her feet. The moment her bare hand touched his, something inside Eleonora shifted. It was not a grand revelation, but a quiet, tectonic realignment. He held her hand for a second longer than necessary, his thumb brushing over a particularly raised knot of skin near her wrist, before releasing her. "Are you harmed from the fall?" he asked, his grey eyes searching her face. She shook her head, hastily pulling the ruined sleeve closed. "No, Your Grace. I must apologize. I have made a scene." "You were frightened," he corrected her. "There is no need to apologize for that." He retrieved the fallen book and her small, silver-framed spectacles from the floor, passing them to her. "But you should know, Eleonora, that I am not frightened. Of you, or of that." He said it so plainly, with such a lack of artifice, that she could only stare at him. "You should have this mended," he said, gently touching the torn fabric of her sleeve. "Before Lady Caroline sees. She strikes me as a woman who lacks understanding." With a final, small bow, he retrieved his cane and left the library, leaving Eleonora trembling, not with fear, but with a fragile, terrifying emotion she had not dared to feel in a decade. Hope. Their fragile accord, however, didn't go unnoticed. Lady Beatrice Crawford had also arrived in Kent, a guest at a neighbouring estate. Her sole purpose was the capture of the Duke of Ashworth. Her family, the Crawfords, were known for their ancient title, but whispers in London's financial circles, whispers overheard by Eleonora's own unfortunate cousin, suggested their coffers were empty. Beatrice was not just hunting for a husband, she was hunting for a lifeline. And she saw Eleonora, the scarred, silent companion, as an infestation in her garden. "My goodness, Miss Vance," Beatrice commented one afternoon, finding Eleonora on the terrace, dutifully winding yarn for Lady Caroline. The Duke was present, reading a newspaper on the other side of the lawn. "You must be terribly prone to chills. I never see you without those dreadful high collars and gloves. Even in this heat." Eleonora's fingers tightened on the yarn. "I am comfortable, thank you, Lady Beatrice." "But it is so unfashionable," Beatrice pressed, her voice carrying on the summer air, loud enough for the Duke to hear. "It makes you look like a nun, or someone in mourning. Are you in mourning, Miss Vance?" "She is occupied, Beatrice." Arthur's voice cut across the lawn, sharp as a razor. He did not even look up from his paper. Beatrice's painted smile tightened. "Arthur, darling, I am merely making conversation, trying to draw the poor creature out of her shell." "I am not a creature, Lady Beatrice," Eleonora said, her voice shaking but clear. "And my shell, as you call it, is my own." Beatrice's eyes widened, her painted-on benevolence vanishing, replaced by a cold fury. "Insolence! From a paid companion! Lady Caroline, you must correct your person." Lady Caroline, who had been dozing, started. "What? Oh, yes." Nora apologized to Lady Beatrice. Eleonora looked from Caroline's weak, confused face to Beatrice's triumphant sneer. She felt the old familiar shame rising, the urge to apologize, to shrink, to disappear. "No," Arthur said. He folded his newspaper with deliberate, deafening precision. He stood, picking up his cane. "She will not." He walked across the lawn, his limp more pronounced, as it always was when he was angered. He stopped beside Eleonora's chair. "Miss Vance has offered no insult, Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She merely stated a fact. You, on the other hand, have been systematically attempting to humiliate her since your arrival. It is unkind, it is unbefitting your station, and it will stop." The entire terrace went silent. A footman, halfway through pouring tea, froze. Beatrice turned a shade of mottled red. "How dare you? She is a nobody, a disfigured—" "Beatrice." The single word was a warning, sharp and final. Go inside. Before you say something you will truly regret." Beatrice, realizing she had overplayed her hand and made herself the villain in front of the very man she sought to impress, snatched up her parasol. "You will regret this, Arthur," she hissed, her voice low and venomous, associating with that. "It will ruin you. It will ruin her." She stormed into the house. Lady Caroline burst into tears. "Oh, this is a disaster! My house party is ruined! Nora, this is all your fault!" Eleanora sat frozen, the ball of yarn in her lap. The Duke of Ashworth had defended her, publicly. He had called her Eleanora. He had stood beside her. He watched Beatrice go, his expression grim. Then he turned to Eleanora. The anger faded from his eyes, replaced by that same steady concern. "I apologize, Miss Vance," he said. "I seem to have caused the very scene I was hoping to avoid." You defended me," Eleanora whispered, still stunned. "A simple statement of fact is not a defense," he said. "It is merely the truth. Now, I believe your employer is distressed." He gestured to the weeping Caroline. Eleanora nodded, her mind reeling, and moved to comfort the woman who paid her, while the man who saw her walked slowly back toward his horse. The whispers, however, didn't stop. They intensified. Beatrice, thwarted in a direct confrontation, took a more insidious route. The staff began to whisper. "How did Miss Vance get those scars?" The gossip mutated. It was not a fire. It was a punishment. She had been acid-tossed by a jilted lover. She had a disease. She was a witch, marked by the devil. Eleanora felt the change. The other servants, once politely distant, now openly stared or crossed themselves as she passed. Lady Caroline, susceptible to any rumor, began treating her with a new air of suspicion and disgust. "Nora," she said a few days later, "I must insist you wear your gloves, even when you are in your own chambers. Cook is complaining that the maids are frightened of you. It is upsetting the household." Eleanora simply nodded, the shame burning a fresh, cold hole in her stomach. She retreated further, back to the rose garden, her only safe place. She found it harder and harder to meet the Duke's eyes in their now infrequent public encounters. He had defended her, yes, but in doing so, he had put a spotlight on her. He had made her seen, and being seen was the one thing she could not bear. He sought her out in the library one evening, where she was replacing books. "You are avoiding me," he stated. It was not a question. "I am busy, Your Grace," she said, her back to him. "You are hiding," he countered. "What Beatrice said, it has driven you back into the shadows." "It is where I belong," she snapped, spinning around, her composure finally breaking. "Do you not see what you have done? By noticing me, you have made me a target. Before, I was just a piece of furniture, ignored, passed over. It was safe. Now they look at me. They whisper. They wonder what the disfigured creature has done to enchant the great Duke of Ashworth. And what have you done?" he asked, his voice soft. "Nothing," she cried. "That is the point. I am nothing but this." She gestured angrily at her high-necked dress. "A collection of ruined skin you are too polite to be disgusted by. Your pity is more cruel than Lady Beatrice's hatred, Your Grace. It gives me hope, and for people like me, hope is a poison." Arthur's face hardened. He stepped closer, his limp pronounced. "Do you truly believe," he said, his voice a low growl, "that I, of all people, would waste my time on pity? I am a man who has seen entire battalions of men eviscerated by cannon fire. I have held my best friend's intestines in my hands while he died. I live in a body that is in constant, grinding pain. I assure you, Miss Vance, I have no appetite for shallow sentiment. Pity is for children." He was so close now she could see the fine lines around his eyes, lines of pain and exhaustion. "When I look at you," he continued, his voice dropping, "I do not see a disfigured creature. I see a woman who reads Latin. I see a woman who understands that Schubert is superior to Mozart for a melancholy evening. I see the woman who, I have learned from my own inquiries in your village, walked back into a burning building to save her brother." Eleonora's breath hitched. How did you—" "I have my own resources," he said dismissively. "What I see, Eleonora, is a mind sharp enough to be my match, and a courage I am not certain I would possess myself. Your shell," he said, echoing her own word, "is the least interesting thing about you." He reached out, not for her hand, but for her face. She flinched, turning her scarred cheek away from him. "Do not," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Please." He let his hand drop. The rejection hung in the air, thick and painful. "Very well," he said, his voice clipped and formal once more. "I will not trouble you with my pity again. Good evening, Miss Vance." He turned and walked, stiff-legged, from the library. Eleonora sank onto the stool, her body shaking. She had pushed away the only person who had ever seen her as whole, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that she had just given Lady Beatrice Crawford exactly what she wanted. The invitation was the talk of the county. The Duchess of Devonshire, visiting her Kent residence, was hosting a grand masked ball. It was the event of the season, and everyone, including the Finch household, was commanded to attend. "A masked ball, Nora," Lady Caroline chirped, ecstatic. "It is the perfect opportunity. I can be mysterious. Men love mysterious, do they not?" For Eleonora, the idea of a mask was a godsend. It was a socially acceptable way to hide. For one night, she would not be the scarred companion. She could wear a domino mask that covered the upper half of her face. Combined with her high-necked gown and a lace collarette, she could almost feel normal. Lady Beatrice, however, had other plans. The Duke's public defence of Eleonora, followed by Eleonora's subsequent avoidance of him, had not gone unnoticed by Beatrice. She saw the Duke's frustration. She saw his lingering, angry glances toward Eleonora. Beatrice concluded wrongly that the Duke's interest had been a fleeting, charitable impulse, and that Eleonora's rudeness had soured it. Beatrice decided it was time to stamp out the ember for good. She would expose Eleonora for the monster she was, breaking this bizarre fascination and forcing the Duke to see real beauty, her own. The ballroom at Devonshire House was a sea of glittering costumes. Eleonora, clad in a simple dark blue velvet that made her blend with the shadows, kept to the edges of the room, observing. She wore a simple black domino mask, and for the first hour, she felt a blessed anonymity. She saw Arthur, Duke of Ashworth. He was not in costume. He wore his standard black evening wear, his face unmasked. It was a statement of power. He had no need to hide. He stood near a set of French doors, his silver-topped cane his only accessory, his face grim. He was scanning the crowd, and Eleonora knew with a cold dread whom he was looking for. She slipped behind a large pillar. "There you are, you skulking mouse!" A voice hissed at her side. Eleonora turned. Lady Beatrice stood there, magnificent in a costume of Diana the Huntress, a silver bow in her hand. Her mask was an elaborate creation of silver filigree and diamonds. "Lady Beatrice," Eleonora murmured, trying to step away. "Oh no, you do not," Beatrice said, her voice a low, vicious purr. "You have been avoiding me. You have been avoiding everyone. But tonight, we are all going to see what you really are. I do not know what you mean. Do you not? Beatrice smiled, a cruel, sharp expression. You think you can hide behind a scrap of velvet? You think the Duke will ever look at you as a woman? You are a charity case, Miss Vance, a broken toy, and I am tired of you being underfoot. Please, leave me alone, Eleanora begged, backing away. Where is your courage now, Miss Vance? Beatrice taunted, following her. The great hero who saved her brother. Or are you just a coward, afraid of a little light? Beatrice was intentionally backing her toward the center of the room, toward the grand, blazing chandelier. Eleanora, realizing the trap, tried to circle around, but Beatrice blocked her path. I think it is time everyone saw the real Miss Vance, Beatrice declared, her voice rising, drawing the attention of those nearby. Beatrice, stop this, Eleanora pleaded, her voice trembling. Stop what? Stop showing the truth? You have bewitched him with this pathetic, wounded bird act. Let us see the bird. Beatrice lunged. It happened in a horrifying instant. Eleanora, conditioned by a lifetime of hiding, threw up her hands to protect her face. Beatrice did not go for the mask. She went for the dress. Her fingers, sharp and cruel, hooked into the delicate lace collarette at Eleanora's throat. With a vicious rip, Beatrice tore the fabric down. The lace, the high collar, the carefully pinned chemisette, all gave way. The music, a lively waltz, scratched to a halt. The chatter of 100 guests died instantly. Eleanora stood frozen in the sudden, terrible silence. Her mask was still on, but it was useless. From her jawline, down her neck, across her collarbone, and disappearing into the bodice of her gown, her scars were bared to the world. The bright, merciless light of the chandelier illuminated every ridge, every silvered patch, every puckered line of damaged skin. They were stark and shocking against the pale skin of her décolletage. Someone gasped. A woman let out a small, horrified shriek. My God, a gentleman muttered. Eleanora's hands flew to her neck, but it was too late. Everyone was staring. She was a monster in a freak show. The room began to spin. The faces, shocked, disgusted, pitying, swam before her eyes. Lady Beatrice's smiled, a look of pure, venomous triumph. My goodness, she said, her voice projecting into the silence. It seems Miss Vance was hiding something after all. How frightful. The shame was a physical force, a wave of heat so intense it threatened to buckle her knees. This was her worst nightmare realized. This was the end. She could feel the tears, hot and stinging, welling in her eyes, blurring the awful, staring faces. She turned to flee, to run, to find the darkest hole in Kent and never, ever come out. Her path was blocked. Arthur Blackwood stood before her. His face was pale, not with disgust, but with a cold, concentrated rage she had never seen. His eyes were not on her scars. They were fixed, with murderous intent, on Lady Beatrice. Eleanora choked back a sob. She could not bear him to see her like this. Not him. She turned her head away, hiding her scarred cheek in the shadow of her own shoulder. Please, she whispered, the sound torn from her throat. Let me pass. Move, Eleanora choked out again, her body trembling violently. She tried to push past him, her eyes squeezed shut, unable to bear the weight of 1,000 stares, least of all his. Arthur did not move. Instead, he did something that stunned the entire room. He took a step closer, deliberately placing his body between Eleanora and the gaping crowd, shielding her. Eleanora. His voice was not a whisper, but it was for her alone. No, she wept, turning her head further away. Don't look at me. I am ashamed." "Look at me," he commanded. It was not a request. It was the order of a man who knew how to lead. Reluctantly, forced by the sheer power in his voice, she turned her head. Her tears tracked through the powder on her face. She kept her scarred cheek averted, her eyes downcast. "You are ashamed," he stated, his voice low and fierce. "Ashamed of what? Of a fire? Of surviving?" She tried to pull her arm back, to cover herself, but her hands were shaking too badly. He caught her left hand, the bare, scarred one that she had, in her panic, pulled from its glove. She tried to snatch it back, her whole body recoiling. He held it fast. He didn't just hold it, he lifted it. He turned it over, his thumb brushing the gnarled knuckles. Then he leaned in, his head bent toward hers, his voice a vibration against her skin that blocked out the horrified whispers of the ton. "Do not turn away," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Ashamed of these?" He nodded toward her neck. "They are not a curse, Eleonora. They are not a mark of shame. They are proof. They're proof you survived." Her breath hitched. A sob trapped in her throat finally broke free. He held her hand tighter. "Now lift your head." "I cannot," she whimpered. "Yes, you can. You walked into a fire. You can certainly face these fools." He straightened, pulling her gently but firmly with him, forcing her to stand tall. He did not release her hand. He turned, his gaze sweeping the room like a drawn saber. The rage on his face was so profound, so cold, that the crowd visibly flinched. "Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice ringing with chilling clarity, "you will leave." Beatrice, her triumphant smile faltering, tried to recover. "Arthur, I was only—" "You," he spat, "are a disgrace to your name. You have done tonight what no French cavalryman ever could. You have made me truly, deeply sickened. Leave this house. Now. You cannot order me. Go." He took one step toward her, and Beatrice, seeing the raw violence in his eyes, stumbled back, turned, and fled the ballroom. Arthur turned back to the room. The silence was absolute. He held Eleonora's scarred hand in his, raising it for all to see. "You are staring," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner. "You see these marks, and you whisper, and you recoil. You see something frightful. You know what I see." He looked down at Eleonora, his expression softening for her alone. "I see a hero," he declared, "while some of us in this room," he tapped his cane on the floor, "hide our wounds from battles fought for king and country. Miss Vance bears hers from a battle fought for love, for family." He turned his gaze back to the crowd, his voice hardening. 10 years ago, she walked through flames to save her brother's life. She bears the marks of that courage, and you dare to find it disgusting? He paused, letting the shame transfer from her to them. "I too have scars," he said, his voice dropping. "I carry a pound of French shrapnel in my thigh. It is a twisted, ugly thing. It causes me pain every single day. It has ended my ability to walk without this," he held up his cane, "or to dance, or to live without a reminder of my own failure to save the men who died next to me." The ton was utterly frozen. This was more honesty than they had heard in their collective lives. "We are both survivors, Miss Vance," he said, his voice soft again, though all could hear. "We are both marked by the fire, in our own ways, and I will be damned if I see any shame in that." And then, in front of the Duchess of Devonshire, in front of all of London society, the Duke of Ashworth, the wealthiest, most powerful, most reclusive man of the age, bowed. He bowed not to the room, but to her. He lifted her scarred, trembling hand to his lips, and kissed the ruined knuckles with a reverence that was unmistakable. "Your courage," he murmured, "is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Eleonora stared at him, the tears still streaming, but they were no longer tears of shame. They were tears of a dam breaking, a decade of self-loathing and fear washing away in the face of his absolute, unwavering acceptance. He offered her his other arm. "Miss Vance, will you allow me to escort you from this spectacle?" She looked at the staring crowd, at the open-mouthed shock. She looked at Lady Caroline, who had fainted into a settee. And then she looked at Arthur. She did not cover her neck. She did not hide her hand. She laid her scarred hand on his forearm, lifted her chin, and for the first time in 10 years, she met the gaze of the world head-on. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said, her voice clear and strong. Together, the war hero and the fire survivor, they turned their backs on the stunned assembly and walked, not in shame, but in triumph, from the ballroom. The following morning, Eleonora was summarily dismissed. "You are to pack your things and be gone by noon," Lady Caroline's father, Lord Finch, told her. He was a small, blustering man who could not meet her gaze. A scandal of this magnitude, a companion, the Duke. It is unseemly. The Duchess of Devonshire herself is appalled. "She is not," a voice said from the doorway. Arthur Blackwood stood there, dressed in a severe riding coat, his cane in hand. He had not been invited. He had simply walked in. Mr. Davies, the butler, hovered uselessly behind him. "Ashworth," Lord Finch sputtered, "this is a private family matter." "It ceased to be private when you allowed Lady Beatrice to assault Miss Vance in public, and did nothing," Arthur said, his voice frigid. He walked into the room, his eyes finding Eleonora, who stood by her small, packed trunk. "She will not be leaving alone. I am here to escort Miss Vance to my sister's home in London. She will be chaperoned there until such time as we are married." Lord Finch's jaw dropped. Eleonora's head snapped up, her heart stopping in her chest. "Married?" Lord Finch squeaked. "Married?" Eleonora whispered. "Miss Vance," Arthur said, turning to her, his expression unreadable. "My actions last night have made your position here untenable. I have, in effect, ruined you for any other post. I am aware of my responsibility." Eleonora's blood ran cold. "Responsibility? You wish to marry me out of duty? Because you feel responsible for my dismissal?" "That is," he began. "No," Eleonora said, the strength from the previous night surging back. "Absolutely not. I will not trade one cage for another. I will not be your responsibility, Your Grace. I would rather be a governess in the wilderness of Scotland than marry a man who pities me." "I told you," he growled, stepping toward her. "I do not deal in pity." "Then what is this? A proposal in front of my employer, who has just cast me out. It is an act of charity, a grand gesture, like kissing my hand in the ballroom." "You believe that was a gesture?" he demanded, his voice low and incredulous. "I do. Foolish woman," he bit out. "Lord Finch, we require the room. Leave us." "I will not be." "You will," Arthur commanded. Lord Finch, facing a man who radiated more authority than the king himself, deflated and scurried from the room. The door clicked shut. They were alone. "You think I am offering charity," Arthur said, his voice raw. "You think I embarrassed Lady Beatrice and insulted the entire for charity?" "What else am I to think?" Eleonora cried, her hands fisted at her sides. "You have never spoken of this. You speak of books and roses. You speak of my mind, but you have never spoken of marriage." "Because I was terrified of exactly this reaction," he exploded, shocking her into silence. He limped over to the window, bracing himself against the frame. "I was terrified you would see it as this obligation, that you would think I was offering for a disfigured creature, because no one else would." He turned to face her, his grey eyes burning. "I am a man of logic, Eleonora. I do not make decisions based on impulse. I have spent the last 6 weeks learning everything about you, your wit, your stubbornness, your profound, aching kindness to those, like Lady Caroline, who do not deserve it. I have found myself thinking not of my estate, but of what book you might be reading. I have found myself, for the first time since Waterloo, sleeping through the night, because my mind is occupied with you instead of the past." He stepped away from the window, closing the distance between them. "I did not defend you at the ball to save you," he said, his voice dropping. "I defended you because what Beatrice did felt like an attack on me, on what I value, on what I love." The word hung in the air, electric and terrifying. "Love?" she whispered. "Yes," he said, his face etched with a vulnerability that matched her own. "I find, to my great surprise, that I am in love with your mind, and I am in love with your strength, and yes, Eleonora, I am in love with your scars. They are a part of you. They are the map of your survival, and I will not have you, or anyone else, deny them." He reached out and, this time, she did not flinch. His fingers gently, tentatively, traced the scar on her cheekbone. "I was not offering charity, Eleonora. I was, clumsily, asking you to save me from a life of profound, aching loneliness. But I will not ask you to marry me out of gratitude, or duty, or fear." He dropped his hand. "So, I will ask you properly. Eleonora Vance, will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? Not my charity case, my partner, my duchess, my equal." Eleonora looked at this man, this broken, beautiful, strong man, who saw not her damage but her worth. The tears came again, but she did not hide them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Arthur, I will." A slow smile, the first real smile she had ever seen from him, transformed his face. "Thank God for that," he breathed, and pulled her into his arms. Their new life began. Arthur established her at his sister's, Lady Hartwell, a kind woman who, like her brother, had no patience for society's foolishness. The Tun was ablaze with the scandal. A week before the wedding, Eleonora had an unexpected visitor, Lady Beatrice Crawford. Eleonora received her in the drawing room. Beatrice was not the preening goddess from the ball. She was pale, her dress fashionable, but slightly frayed at the cuffs. She wore no jewellery. "You," Beatrice said, her voice flat, "have won." "This was not a contest, Lady Beatrice," Eleonora said quietly, gesturing for her to sit. Beatrice ignored her. "Do you know why I did it?" Beatrice asked, her voice cracking. "Do you think I am just a monster? That I was born cruel? I do not know what you are." "I am ruined," Beatrice spat. "My father, Lord Crawford, has gambled away everything. Our estates are mortgaged to the hilt. We are destitute. Ashworth, he was my last chance, my family's last chance. I had to secure him. And you, this nothing, you were in my way." The twist was not one of melodrama, but of sad, grubby reality. This was not a villain from a novel. It was a desperate woman, cornered by a society that valued her for nothing but her ability to marry well. "You were," Beatrice continued, "a better survivor than I. You had his respect, his admiration. I only had my face, and it was not enough." "What will you do?" Eleonora asked, her anger replaced by a cold, weary pity. "My father has arranged a match. An ancient, wheezing Scottish laird with 10,000 acres of rock. He will pay my father's debts, and I will live out my days in a damp castle, bearing his heirs. I wanted you to know," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, "that you did not just take a duke. You took my entire world." Beatrice turned and left, a proud, defeated woman, leaving Eleonora to contemplate the fine line between survival and ruin. The wedding was not a grand society affair. It was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, but the attendees were few. Arthur's sister, Lady Hartwell, Eleonora's brother, Thomas, brought down from Cambridge, his eyes wide with awe at his sister's sudden, incredible fortune, and a few of Arthur's old army colleagues. Eleonora's dress was an act of defiance. It was made of a deep, cream-coloured silk. Arthur himself had sat with the modiste, a woman named Madame Celeste, and discussed the design. The neckline was not high. It was a modest, respectable boat neck, but it did not hide the scars on her collarbone. They were simply there, a part of her, framed by the beautiful cut of the gown. Her left sleeve was lace, the pattern intricate, not to hide the skin beneath, but to complement it, as if the scars themselves were part of the embroidery. Her hair was pinned up, and the scar on her cheek was visible. She wore no veil, only a string of pearls, the Ashworth pearls. As she walked down the aisle, she met Arthur's gaze. He stood waiting, his cane set aside, leaning slightly on his best man. The look in his eyes, a fierce, possessive, adoring pride, banished her last wisp of self-doubt. They settled into life at Ashworth, the Duke's vast country estate. The first few months were an adjustment. The servants, led by the formidable housekeeper Mrs. Albright, were wary of their new mistress. They had heard the London gossip. Eleonora won them over, not with grand gestures, but with quiet competence. She knew how to run a household. She had been doing it on a shoestring budget for her own family before the fire. She was kind, but firm. She learned every servant's name, and she deferred to Mrs. Albright on matters of tradition, while gently implementing her own changes. But her greatest triumph was the garden. Arthur found her there one crisp autumn afternoon, kneeling in the dirt, her gloves and a small trowel beside her. She was wearing one of his old work shirts over her dress, her sleeves rolled up, her scarred arms exposed to the sun. He stood watching her for a long time. She was humming, a sound he had never heard from her before. She was utterly at peace. "You are destroying the eglantines, I see," he said, walking toward her. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, and smiled. It was a full, radiant smile that lit up her entire face, scarred side and all. "I am being ruthless, my love, just as you instructed. They will be magnificent in the spring." He sat on the stone bench, setting his cane beside him. "You are magnificent now, Eleonora." She blushed and returned to her pruning. "Thomas writes from Cambridge. He says your endowment of a new science hall is the talk of the university. He is insufferably proud to call you his brother-in-law." "He is a bright lad," Arthur said. "He will make a name for himself. He has your resilience." "He has his own," she said softly. "He did not have to be reminded of his ordeal every day." Arthur grew serious. He watched her work, her bare, scarred hand, deftly managing the shears. "Do they still pain you?" he asked, his voice quiet. She paused. "The scars? No, not for a long time. The memory, sometimes, when I see a fire, or when I am in a crowd." "And when you look in the mirror?" he asked, his voice gentle. Eleonora put down the shears. She looked at her hand, really looked at it, in the bright, unfiltered sunlight. She thought of the London ballroom, of Beatrice's spite, of a world that demanded perfection. And she thought of this man who had seen her at her absolute worst, at her most exposed, and had called her a hero. "When I look in the mirror," she said, meeting his gaze, "I see the Duchess of Ashworth, and she has very important work to do. These," she held up her hand, "are just me. They are no different than your leg, or my spectacles, or the grey in your hair." He smiled. "There is no grey in my—" "There is," she laughed, "at your temples. I find it very distinguished." He got up from the bench, wincing slightly, and pulled her to her feet. He was covered in dirt, and she in sweat and soil. "You are a mess, Your Grace," he murmured, his hands moving from her waist to her shoulders. "As are you, Your Grace," she replied, her own hands resting on his chest. "I am I?" He leaned in and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that tasted of autumn air, and a future she had never, ever believed possible. He rested his forehead against hers. "I am glad you survived, Eleonora Blackwood." "I am glad we survived," she corrected him, and she lifted her face to the sun, no longer afraid of the light. "Thank you for listening to this story of resilience and love. Eleonora's journey was not just about finding a man who could accept her, but about finding the strength to accept herself. Her scars were not a flaw to be hidden, but a testament to her courage, and it took someone just as strong, someone who understood the nature of survival, to show her that truth. We all have our own scars, some visible, some hidden deep within. This story reminds us that those marks do not define us, our courage does. If you were moved by Eleonora and Arthur's story, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel grow and bring more stories like this to you. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their own survival is beautiful. And of course, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and ring that bell so you never miss a new tale of drama, history, and romance. We thank you for your time and hope to see you in the next video.